Well, enrollment in Christian schools has gone up significantly over the past couple of years. What is the cause of it, and is it sustainable for the future? We're going to be talking with Jenn McConnell of Great Commission Schools today on Mission and Likeness. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mission and Likeness. My name is Scott. Thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. We're going to be talking with Jenn McConnell. She is the Superintendent of Great Commission Schools in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I'm really excited for the conversation with her because we're going to be talking about this increase in enrollment in the Christian schools and what the cause of it is, what kind of new struggles does that present to schools, and then how they work as an independent Christian school to provide a great education and to help kids grow and know the gospel and to follow Jesus well in all of life. But that conversation is coming up in just a couple minutes. But I do want to start just by talking a little bit about why Christian schools are seeing record enrollment growth. And is this just something that was born out of COVID, or is this an actual cultural shift? Or are we just seeing the politicalization, I'm not quite sure which it is, but are we seeing politics drive the curriculums of our schools, and should it be the main force behind our schools, where we have more left-leaning schools and right-leaning schools, or our Christian schools, do they fall into either of those? Do parents see Christian schools as more conservative? And obviously we can't answer all of those questions, but we want to see what kind of has gotten at what is the root cause of all of this, and what are some things that we can do as Christians, as believers, to be able to support our local schools. Now, I want to say a couple of disclaimers, I guess, here at the forefront of this episode. Number one, I want to make sure that in no way I lump that I'm not lumping all public schools in any way into one category. I am fully aware that there are really, really good public schools. I believe that the public school that my kids go to is phenomenal. It is awesome. I love the school that my kids go to. If that were to change, then we may consider taking our kids out of it. But at this point, we have no reason to take our kids out of school, out of the public school that they are in. Now, I also understand that there are public schools that have just gone off the complete deep end. You saw the whole debacle, or maybe you didn't see the whole debacle, of the Loudoun County, Virginia school district, and everything that was going on there, and all of the craziness that transpired down there. We've seen a lot of the introduction of sexual curriculums for students in kindergarten, first and second and third grades, and that needs to be completely taken out of our schools. There's no reason for our schools to go into that. But we're going to have that conversation, and this is going to be a conversation that's going to need to be had for decades to come. But it needs to start now. And I think a lot of parents are having this conversation now, but we're gonna take a really quick break, and then we'll be right back as we pick up this conversation about how the effects of the pandemic, combined with cultural shifts and political pressure, are causing the rise of enrollments in our Christian schools. We'll be right back. Here at loveLocal, we are committed to helping shape the culture through entertaining and engaging content that unites followers of Jesus and helps us to live out the gospel in every area of life. By becoming a local, you're not just helping us build that mission, but you're helping to carry it out as well. Becoming a local is easy, and it gives you access to all of our content. So if you haven't already, please consider becoming a local today. Together, we can help share the gospel locally so that we can reach globally. All right, so here's the one school that came out and was featured in this article from readline.com. It is College Heights Christian School in Joplin, Missouri. So I'm going to read from this article, and here to set the context, it is July 2020, and Dan Decker was named the superintendent of College Heights Christian School. And he was facing a soon-to-start school year riddled with uncertainty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so he created a task force of faculty, parents, and students to put together a plan for in-person classes with remote option for those who wanted it. Still, the school's goal was to grow, and Deckard wondered if that goal was possible in the current climate. So now we're going to fast forward to fall of 2021. Enrollment at College Heights Christian is up 13%, and now there's a waiting list for kids to get into the grade. And this isn't the only example of this. This is all across the country. We have seen schools that have hit 20, 30, 40% increases in enrollment. We have seen schools that have doubled in their size over the course of the last 3 years and are projecting to grow even more. The concern that I have is the motives behind this. Is this because parents want to put their kids in an educational system that is gospel-centered, or are they putting them into a Christian school because it's the opposing, as a means of sticking it to the public schools and just saying, we're sick of your crap, we're putting them in Christian schools? Now, I can't judge someone's heart, obviously, but I think this could end up being a concern for schools later on, for Christian schools later on. Because my hope is that parents are saying, we want to send our kids to a Christian school because we value them learning about who God is and what he has done, and we want them to learn the gospel. We want them to give them a proper and good education. And if that also includes that they're not learning about, all of the different, sexual things that they're putting in schools and all of the false history that they put in schools and rewriting, what the history of the country is, what the world is, and how evil America, like all of that stuff, if it includes that, but fundamentally we're switching them because of the fact that we want them to learn more about Jesus, we want them in a Christian environment, versus I just don't want them in this other environment. Because what happens is those would be the first to potentially leave the school should there be issues, or should they feel like, oh well, I guess culture corrected itself and it's safe to send your kids back to public school. I mean, like I said, our public school where we send our boys, we absolutely love. We think it's a phenomenal school. We have a good relationship with the teachers that our boys have had, with the administration that is there. And here's the other thing that I want to quickly say. If you have an issue with your public school, and obviously there are many, many reasons why you would want to pull your kid out of public school. But if you want to be part of the solution with the school, you can. And I don't mean by throwing boycotts and by marching and protesting, and maybe in some cases that's needed, I don't know. But the main thing that you can do is be involved. There are school board meetings that you can go to, that you can peacefully and respectfully voice your opinions. If you feel like you are in the majority, then you should have no problem going in. You should have no problem voting people in And, I'm sure Jen would agree with this. Just because you send your kid to a Christian school doesn't mean that all the problems go away. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be issues at the Christian school. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be situations that need to be addressed. The school doesn't parent your kid. The school just provides an atmosphere. It provides an environment for your kid to learn, to grow intellectually, to grow socially, to grow spiritually. And that's all needed. But the role of parenting and raising your child is still your primary responsibility. So don't count on someone else doing the work for you. I mean, that's arguably why we've gotten into the position where we are. And you see this happening in a ton of public schools across the country where parents are beginning to run for school board. They're getting in there. They're seeing all of the craziness that's happening. And again, this isn't every school, but there are a number of school districts where this is happening. You can prevent it by being a part of your school. Don't just be a bystander in everything that's going on. So the other thing that this article points out from readline.com is that Christian schools offer parents curriculum they agree with. So I'm just going to read from this article. It says, online learning gave parents and caregivers a glimpse into the public school curriculum, and many didn't like what they saw. Some approached local school boards with their concerns and with mixed success. Now, parents' rights when it comes to the local curriculum, fueled by hot-button topics such as critical race theory, have come to the head in many states. Education has become a defining issue in the Virginia governor's race, where and this must have been before Terry McAuliffe lost, where Terry McAuliffe declared during the debate, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach." Now, parents like Whitney Scott disagree, embracing either their fully private education experience or a hybrid one that provides a combination of homeschooling and in-class instruction. Now, what I want to say, and again, I didn't look to see when this article was written, November 1st of last year, but I think there's truth to that. I mean, I think it is. I think when the governor of Virginia came out and said that parents don't have or shouldn't be telling schools what they're teaching, I think that hit a nerve with a lot of people. Now, I will say this. When it comes to math and, all of that kind of history and computers, like I don't know if I could write out a curriculum and say, well, this is what you should be teaching my kid. But I do know things you shouldn't be teaching my kid. You shouldn't be teaching my kid, in kindergarten, the different types of, we won't even get into it. But there's a lot of things that they are now teaching and they're introducing into, even kindergarten that is heinous. And to say that parents shouldn't be telling schools what to teach, I do see a little bit, I do understand a little bit of that. But at the end of the day, the parents are the ones that decide, what shouldn't be taught. If there's something that they don't feel should be taught in a school, especially on a, from a moral situation, then yeah, they should definitely have that. And the other thing, that I find so interesting is the number of homeschooling families. The number of families that have gone to homeschooling is through the roof. And it's going to be interesting. We are living in strange times, exciting times. And I think we're living in times where we are going to see a monumental shift. And I think there's going to be so much good that comes out of kids moving into Christian schools and, being able to have different exposures to different things. What I fear is that it's going to create two parallel realities, one on one side, one on the other. And then when they meet in the real world and are faced with people who think completely different from them, it could cause a ton of issues. We'll be right back. So what do we do whenever we face all these big issues? Well, the number one thing that we can do is make sure that we are teaching our kids the gospel, because that way we are seeing everyone through the image of who God made them. And that allows us to build and strengthen relationships no matter the circumstances. Knowing the principles and values of the businesses and organizations that you support is growing more and more important each and every day. That's why here at loveLocal, we are building a community of people that support businesses like yours and share in your beliefs. So if your business or organization would like to partner with us and help us build that culture and community, visit lovelocalpa.com/partner and fill out our free partnership form today. Welcome back to Mission of Likeness. We are here joined by Jenn McConnell. She is the superintendent of the Great Commission School in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Jenn, thanks for joining me here on the podcast today.
Thanks, Scott. It's an honor to be here.
So I wanted to have Jenn in because, one, she was referred by a friend of mine, and they said, you gotta have Jenn on the podcast. And I said, well, then we'll have her on. But aside from that, what we were talking about earlier in the episode is this boom in this interest in Christian education and how it is becoming somewhat of a cultural shift for kids to be moving into Christian schools. And so, one, I want to start off by saying, what has been the big thing that you've seen in the last 2 or 3 years that has really stood out to you as far as seeing more families coming and wanting to explore a Christian education for their kids?
I think specifically for Great Commission schools and even some other schools across the nation, COVID definitely pushed that shift to go forward where initially parents were looking for something that was different than what the public school was given. And especially in the early stages of that, they wanted their kid to be back in school full time and not have to go through the whole online learning or the Zoom classes and everything like that. So we saw whenever COVID started to occur, more people inquiring to be students at Great Commission schools. And then just through over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, the enrollment has sustained or continued to grow simply because of the number of students in our classrooms to the teacher ratio, and because parents are they're kind of tired with the public school system. The over crowded classrooms, the lack of funding and resources. Their kid is just another kid in the class. They're not being seen as an individual. And so we actually get a lot of inquiries from families in the area because of our low student to teacher ratio. It's definitely a numbers game whenever it comes to parents that are searching for Christian education, but it's definitely a cultural shift, especially for families who are more Christian-like families where they're not happy with the curriculums that are being taught in public schools now.
And one of the things that I feel is important to establish too is the idea of having, you say that low student to teacher ratio, mm-hmm. that in no way indicates the quality of education. Some people say, oh, well, they have small classes, so how can they possibly, teach at a level that's going to be, as good as a different school? But
right.
But I mean, we have seen year after year the number of kids coming out of GCS and going on and just thriving, whether they go into, the traditional 4-year college or 2-year college, or even just out into the workforce. I mean, you guys, how do you approach that? Because I mean, you are a small Christian school, so
right.
So your funding isn't exactly just through the roof either. how do you kind of manage all that, and how do you build a team mm-hmm. to be pushing towards being the best and being excellent at everything you do?
It first comes down to the teachers that we have on staff. From the very get-go, they know that it's a ministry-filled position where all of the teachers that we have on staff are certainly qualified and more than capable to get a full-time job with better pay, full-time benefits in a public school in the area. So whenever they commit to teaching at Great Commission, they commit to it being a ministry. So really it comes down to initially the heart of the teacher wanting to be there, and knowing that it is a mission field. And then every year, whenever we start gearing up for the beginning of the school year with beginning of teacher in services, and then throughout the course of the year, we're always impressing upon the teachers in terms of the fact that we are a small school and we are a Christian school. We don't only just teach the academic subjects that we have to, but we also teach to the heart and the mind and the spiritual development of each and every student that walks through our doors. So the commitment from the teachers is what really gets those students to be as successful as they are. And one of the greatest things that I love is whenever alumni start bringing their kids back and they start attending our school, or they give testimony about how the teacher that they had in 8th grade and that sustained them all throughout 12th grade is now still continuing to contact them, to check in on them, see how they are. So it's not just a 1 year and done thing. It's a lifetime commitment whenever we have these students walk through our doors. I think the students see that, and that's what creates a great learning environment, is that they see that the teachers care for them.
And how has the ability, or how is the teacher's ability to invest in a smaller number of kids, because you do get to know them personally, not just from the academia side, where you can say, oh, well, this is where you are, in your academic learning improvements, or, where they might need things, but they get to know them on more of a personal level as well. How does that just add another layer of growth for the students, being able to have a teacher who knows just a little bit more how they operate and a little bit more about them?
Yeah. So whenever it comes to student learning, it's best to know the child that is in your classroom that you're teaching to. So to learn about what makes them tick and what makes them, shut down, and what makes them learn best. And so what the teachers try to do is get on a deep personal level with the students in their classroom so that they can best meet the needs of the students that they have. And one of the greatest things that I try to tell the teachers all the time, and I operate in my own life, is if we look at the scriptures, some of the greatest moments of Jesus's walk in with people was that he welcomed the interruptions. Mm-hmm. And so whenever it comes to teaching in a class, sometimes the greatest need is not teaching algebra for the day, but it's meeting that student's social or emotional need. And so if the kid is coming in with something that is interrupting or hindering their learning process, we try to meet that before it kind of snowballs into bigger problems.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's creating that bond, that trust between the teacher and the student, so that the student feels comfortable in the classroom to talk to the teacher about whatever it is that's going on in their life. And those relationships with the teacher and the student are what create a more dynamic learning environment.
Now, the one thing that I also, I think people realize this, but they tend to ignore is they say, oh, well, if they're going to a Christian school, like they're going to, like maybe that'll fix my kid, like sending them to a Christian school, and there won't be any of this and there won't be any of that.
Right.
But kids are kids.
They are.
And they're, whether they go to a
school or not, they're going to be subjected to the forces of nature that are outside their control. Yes.
So you're going to have the romance and the higher education. You're going to have the cooties and the lower in the lower levels. I mean, you see all of it. So that's Christian schools, any school is not hidden from that.
Yeah.
But what I do see is that being a school that is grounded on the gospel allows you to approach those different things or those different situations differently. So how does GCS or Great Commission how do they utilize the gospel when it comes to those situations around discipline or relationships, whether that's just friend to friend or even in the dating relationships? How do you use the gospel to kind of guide how you teach and how you provide guidance to students?
I mean, it's the foundation of everything that we build Great Commission on. Whenever people walk through our doors, the first and foremost thing that we say is that we are Christians and we teach everything from a Christian worldview. So whenever it comes to dating and relationships and discipline, we point to the scriptures and say, okay, well, this is where we're getting our rules and procedures from. This is where we're getting our advice from. So whenever we have a group of 8th grade students who are getting at each other's throats towards the middle of the year, well, we talk to them about why taming our tongue is so important and that words are supposed to be honey on our lips. And, and so just pointing back to the gospel and how Jesus has taught us to treat other people and to handle all situations. So it really is that cornerstone that we build upon everything else, because without it, there is no academics and there is no relationships and there is nothing that is sustainable for our organization.
So do you think this increase in interest in Christian schools is this just, I guess, how big of an opportunity is this for a school, and how do you plan as an administrator, as a superintendent, to be able to say, okay, we've seen year over year increases like we haven't seen. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you plan for the future as far as, whether you need bigger facilities, bring in more teachers, how do you stay true to what your objectives are, having that personal relationship, right, while trying to figure out, is this something that's going to continue growing?
Right. And I think that's one of the things in Christian education that is always unsteady, because you can go from 150 kids in one school year to then dropping down to 100 kids, and you're wondering about how you're going to make ends meet. This is my 6th year operating in this position. In the first 4 years, I kept looking at the financials thinking, I'm not going to be able to pay all of my teachers based upon the enrollment and the finances that were coming in. And so it definitely was on strong prayer life that got us through. And so over the last couple of years, we've now been able to steady ourselves just because of there being an increase in enrollment. And so we try to plan for the future as best we can based upon what we need in terms to pay our operational expenses. So we always say every year, okay, well, this is our goal number of students to get to. Mm-hmm. And so I have a really phenomenal marketing director who, man, she puts it out there, and it's just kind of like her ROI, her return on investment is like, I'm keeping you on. I don't even care if your kids graduate, and you leave. Like, you're staying because your marketing techniques are what's helping us to get us out into the community and to help sustain us. And so one of the terms that we have kind of coined this year whenever talking about the finances and the budget is creative financing. So how do we look at the different budgetary items and how do we move and shift things around in order to continue operating, and so then looking for the future, we're like, okay, well, taking a look at the amount of students that we have this year, well, we need a new building in order to continue to grow. And so the last couple of meetings that we've had in terms of board meetings, it's always been like, okay, well, what do we need to put in place in order to move out of our current structure into a bigger facility to grow as a student body, but yet still be able to pay the bills. Yeah. Because like you said before too, like whenever it comes to monetary resources, they're very limited whenever it comes to Christian schools and private education. So it's difficult. And every year it's always okay, let's pray about this and let's move forward and know that it's in God's hands. And, we've been in operation since 1996. And so we're kind of that steady ship that's set to sail, and He sustained us ever since through the highs and lows. And so we trust in Him, and are diligent and good stewards of what we have, so that we can sustain the ministry.
So it sounds, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the team that you have is tight knit.
Yeah.
You're in it together. You're for each other.
Hmm.
I mean, it's it's a it's a blessing to see that, and that's something that is I'm sure you and everyone else in the organization cherishes. You know, to be able to
Yeah.
have that. So as you look to the future, I mean, what are some of the bigger? You mentioned the building.
Hmm.
What are some of the other obstacles that you see or that your team is talking about that might be happening in the next couple of years?
Well, in order to provide the best educational experience for our students, increasing our staff. You know, whenever it comes to scheduling every springtime, it takes quite a few weeks, if not months, to build a schedule because we have a very limited amount of staff. And so every teacher is booked from the morning until the afternoon. And so it would be nice to bring on more personnel to disperse classes so that teachers aren't overworked, but then to also offer more opportunities for our students. So, right now it's kind of a rigid schedule. We have some flexibility here and there. Whenever it comes to offering like more off the key classes, outside of your English and math and stuff like that, our schedule is very limited to be able to do that because of our staffing issue. So, in the future, what we're looking at is if we increase our building capacity, we're going to have to increase our staffing capacity. And then that would also lend itself to keeping our classes at a small teacher to student ratio and still keeping that familial relationship with the kids.
Right.
Hmm.
So then, how do you see GCS in the community? What role does it play here in central Pennsylvania, and how's it differentiate itself from just being a traditional school?
Yeah. So one of the things, our main mission and our goal for our students is to see them serving God and others. And so we try to incorporate a lot of service type activities throughout the school day, throughout the school year, so that the students are learning that life is not just about them.
That's a tough thing to
It's a very
teach.
tough thing to do, especially with, those middle school kids who, and especially now with social media being as popular as it is, and these TikTok videos and Instagram reels and stuff like that. It's just, they're always looking at themselves. And so trying to create that perspective where it's not just about you, it's about other people. So one of the things that we love doing throughout the school year is serving at the Reaper's Food Ministry over at First Baptist Church with Pastor Pepper. And then throughout the year, as things pop up, I'm more than willing to say, oh, yeah, you want to take your math class to go bake cookies for Christmas time? Fine. Yeah, that's great because it's teaching kids to serve other people than themselves. And so on top of, teaching the kids the academic subjects and everything, my main goal, and I think the main goal for Great Commission schools in terms of seeing them serving God and others is to make them very productive members of society. So whether they go straight into the workforce, whether they go to, college or a university or into a trade or a tech school, we want to make sure that they can come out being productive and then be able to give back into this community or whatever community they find themselves in.
That's phenomenal. And I love the idea where you said, you want to give that flexibility, and it just reminds me of what you said earlier about, accepting those interruptions,
Yes.
Having that little bit of an interruption, allowing the kids to see how that works out in real life. Because I mean, as adults, we're hit with interruptions all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually one of the biggest struggles, with kids is they see social media, and social media is such a it's a like you said, self-focused, but it's also the best image of so many of these influencers out there. And you don't see the struggle, you don't see the grind and all of those interruptions that happen throughout their careers. And so I think that's a really important thing. So what is the GCS kind of rule of thumb when it comes to social media and how students are using it? Is that something that the school tries to welcome and say, yes, we want you to be expressive. We want you to understand and be able to communicate that way? Or is it a fine line between using it for a social means versus something that is more of an addictive?
Yeah, it can go one of two ways. I always tell the kids, hey, listen, I'm not the social media police. I'm not going to be trolling your pages to see what kind of content you're creating. If something comes across my desk from a parent or from another student that I have to deal with, well, then I'll deal with it then. But whenever it comes to social media usage at the beginning of the years, especially in our computer classes and even with our school counselor, we tried to every year just talk about acceptable usage of social media and how do we stay safe on it and how do we properly use it, not just for personal gain, but to promote the kingdom. So some kids battle with that,
Sure.
because they see culturally what's going on around them, and that, you talk to any middle school kid and they're going to be the next famous influencer or YouTuber. And it's like, okay, that's really great. And you know what? One of these days, those skills are going to be beneficial for you. But right now, don't get so self-absorbed that you're losing who you truly are, or you're losing the perspective of other people.
Yeah.
So because I can see with the social media uses, people lose respect very quickly, especially if you use it in a negative way. So teaching them the appropriate ways to use social media, and to remember that it's ultimately reflecting who they are, and it'll stay with them for the rest of their lives.
which is an awesome way to be able to, if you're teaching them the gospel and how we are the image of God and how we act in his likeness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that should shape how we then communicate and put our image out there on social media. I'm here with Jenn McConnell. She is the superintendent of Great Commission Schools in Altoona. GCS is a non-denominational Christian school that serves kindergarten through 12th grade in Blair County and the surrounding areas. If you'd like more information about Great Commission Schools, head to greatcommissionschools.org. That's greatcommissionschools.org. If you're not in this area, I would encourage you to go and inquire to one of the Christian schools in your neighborhood, in your area. If there isn't a Christian school in your area, maybe talk to one that is close by and see what it might take to launch a Christian school. I mean, I think that there is going to be a continued increase in desire for Christians to come together, to get churches to come together, and to offer a alternative to the public school system. And again, I just want to say, we're not in any way saying that all public schools are bad and all public schools are, indoctrinating your children with evil and, all of that. But what we are saying is there is a growing number of public schools that are taking liberties way too far, and there needs to be an alternative. I mean, and I think that's a healthy thing for our community, for our country, to have a healthy alternatives. And as believers, we really need to give some time and effort into supporting our Christian schools, whether we send our kids there or not. Support them and support the families that are sending their kids there. So greatcommissionschools.org, check them out, K through 12, serving Blair County. So Jenn, I want to spend the next couple of minutes that we have here kind of tying together some things. Mm-hmm. First of all, you said you've been superintendent 6 years, correct? Mm-hmm. How does one get into a superintendent position, at a Christian school?
Ask this question. You know what? It was definitely a God thing, and if we had more time, I could go into the full details of it. Whenever I first started studying education, I never even dreamed of being in administration. But this was kind of like I like to say, it was a Holy Spirit slap in the face. Whenever the previous superintendent said that she was stepping down, she had phone called me because I was working part-time at GCS and part-time at a local public school. And so as soon as I hung up that phone, I heard the Holy Spirit tell me, she's going to ask you to take that position. And so then a couple weeks later, she walked into the office at the same time I did. And she said, "Hey, I had a funny thought on the way to work. Call it a funny thought or a God thought." And I was like, "Oh man, here it is." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Just go ahead. I already know what you're going to ask me."
Yeah.
So it kind of was something that you could say fell into my lap. And if I'm being honest with you, Scott, the day that she handed over the keys to me, I sat at her desk and I cried. And I texted her and I was like, "Are you sure I'm the right person for this position?" And it became pretty apparent then, probably about a month or two into school, that I was designed for such a position. So I can't say that I was fully trained in it. I stepped into the position with a bachelor's degree, working on a master's degree. I had no training in administration whatsoever. I wasn't even a principal at that point. I went straight from being a teacher to an administrator. And so I had a lot of on-the-job training, which I think made me better for it, because it made me flexible, and it allowed me to do my own research and getting into how do I make things work specific for this school, instead of going in with preconceived notions of like, oh, well, this is how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
And I think that's critical that people learn. Because I think so often, and this would be big for students too, you could be designed for a specific role, and you might be the perfect fit, but that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at it.
Right.
There is growth, and we never reach our full growing potential. I mean, sin is constantly, battling us down. And so, I mean, just because you're good at something, if you have passion for it, it doesn't mean you'll be the best, but it gives you something to work towards. And it's awesome to see that you have found kind of this place where you feel like you can grow in an environment where you can then use your gifts that God has given you and really just touch the lives of so many kids.
Right.
That's just awesome. And I love seeing that.
And it's a testimony for me too, to then tell other people and say, "Hey, listen, I know the frustrations of closed doors. I walked through them for so many years, not realizing what was to come, and so I kept striving for what I thought I was supposed to do. But God had other plans, and then, the other side of the coin of that is, we hear it all the time, God doesn't, qualify, or, the world doesn't qualify us, right? God does. And so, I tell people all the time, like, even if you don't have the qualification, that doesn't mean that you aren't the right one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's really wise guidance for people.
Yeah.
So how do you personally stay on mission? How do you stay focused on what God has called you to do? And what does that look like practically, day to day?
Yeah, one of the things that I tell the students and staff all the time, because I love being transparent with just the different struggles, because the job is so busy and there's so many different spinning plates, it can be very difficult to keep God in it, because I tell them all the time, if I am not careful and if I'm not diligent with my God time, I can schedule him right out of everything, because I look at a checklist of everything that needs to get done. So being disciplined and being diligent to spend time with God each and every day, because without it, I wouldn't have the strength to continue in such a role.
Right.
So leading a Christian school is not for the faint of heart, especially because we know that we're doing the Lord's work. The attack is going to be much heavier. And so just being disciplined to spend quiet time with him and to get rejuvenated, reconnected, refreshed, and then recharged to continue the work.
How does your support system, the friends that you have around you, I mean, is there opportunities? I mean, I'm sure with some of the things that you deal with throughout the school year, you can't elaborate on situations. I mean, so how do people pour into you and help you to just remind you of the mission and to encourage you?
Yeah, it was a very hard transition. And it even still is a struggle of mine. Whenever it comes time to express my frustrations with certain things because of the the nature of the business. Like I can't just divulge all kinds of information, so I have a really good spiritual mentor that I can go to and kind of, like lay it all out there and say, hey, listen, this is what I'm struggling with. And she's really great because she doesn't ask me details. She doesn't say like, oh, well, give me more. She just redirects me and she's wonderful because then she points me back to scripture. I'm like, oh yeah, as a Christian school leader, I should know that. But sometimes you lose focus because you're so fixated on the struggle, So my spiritual mentor has really helped me. And then, Pastor Jim, Transformation Church, he's a wonderful leader. And so I kind of gear my leadership style a little bit towards his. And if I'm struggling with anything, I'll just shoot him a text and say, hey, how do you deal with this? You've been in leadership for so long. And then I even connect with the Christian school leaders in the area. And a couple years ago, right before COVID hit, I started the Christian School Leaders Roundtable of Blair County.
Nice.
But we haven't really picked that up since COVID's happened. But
it's been a little busy.
It's been a little busy, yeah. But then that was also another an outlet source to say, hey, listen, you all are in the same kind of demographic area. You see the same kind of struggles, whether it's personnel, student, community based, whatever. How did you handle it? And so making sure that I'm surrounded by people who can continue to redirect my focus to where it needs to be, and then just be able to walk alongside us in this ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that is crucial. And it's crucial to surround yourself by people who are like-minded and in the same kind of fight. And two, to be able to have those spiritual leaders around you to be able to guide you and to even say, hey, like maybe this is something that you need to be cautious of, to warn you, to lead you back to Jesus is awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a great conversation. I'm incredibly encouraged by your story. So just thanks for coming on.
Oh man, I could keep talking. We're done already?
That's typically how it goes. I mean, it goes by so fast. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're listening in on this, thanks for having us as well. You can learn more about loveLocal and what we are up to. Go to loveLocalPA.com. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that kind of fun stuff. And you can become a local. Help support us here at loveLocal. Just go to loveLocalPA.com/join. And we will see you next week on a new episode of Mission and Likeness. But until then, have a good week.